I didn't catch him cheating in a dramatic moment. There was no single scene that changed everything. Just a slow realization that built over time until ignoring it became harder than accepting it. It started with small things that didn't feel important enough to question. Little changes in behavior that could easily be explained if I wanted them to be. And for a long time, I chose to believe those explanations. He began replying to messages a little later than usual, not always, just enough to create a pattern that felt slightly off, but not strong enough to prove anything on its own. I noticed the way he smiled at his phone sometimes, a quiet, private kind of smile that didn't include me, and I told myself it didn't mean anything, even though it felt like it did. There were moments when he seemed distracted during conversations, as if part of his attention was somewhere else. And I filled in the gaps with excuses because I wasn't ready to question what it might mean. I told myself relationships go through phases, that people get tired, that life becomes routine, and that not every change is something to worry about, even when something inside me disagreed. The truth is, I noticed everything long before I admitted it to myself. I just didn't want to connect the pieces because I already knew what they would form if I did. There is a moment when suspicion stops feeling like imagination and starts feeling like quiet certainty. And I reached that moment slowly, without even realizing when it happened. It wasn't one big sign, it was a collection of small ones, stacked on top of each other until they became impossible to ignore, even if none of them were enough on their own. He started guarding his phone more carefully, turning the screen away slightly when I was nearby, not in an obvious way, just enough to create distance without drawing attention. I saw it, I registered it, and then I looked away, because acknowledging it would have forced me to ask questions I wasn't ready to hear the answers to. I convinced myself that trust meant not being suspicious, that it meant giving him space, that it meant believing his words even when his actions didn't fully match them. That's how I stayed comfortable, by choosing the version of reality that required the least amount of confrontation, even if it wasn't the most honest one. The shift between us was subtle but constant. Conversations became shorter, laughter became rare, and everything we shared began to feel like something we were maintaining instead of living. I felt it happening. I knew something was changing, but I kept telling myself it was temporary, that things would go back to normal if I just gave it time. Then, one evening, I saw something that didn't fit into any of the explanations I had been using. Something small but clear enough to break through everything I had been telling myself. It was the way he reacted when his phone buzzed, a quick glance, a slight smile, and then a shift in his expression when he realized I had noticed, like something had been hidden too late. In that moment, everything slowed down, and instead of looking away like I usually did, I paid attention, fully and honestly, without trying to soften what I was seeing. And that was the moment I knew, not with doubt or confusion, but with a quiet, undeniable certainty that didn't need proof or confirmation from anyone else. He was cheating, and I knew it. Even if I couldn't point to one single piece of evidence that would convince someone else, it was already clear to me. What surprised me most was not the realization itself, but how calm I felt when it finally became real, like something inside me had already prepared for this moment. I didn't confront him, I didn't ask questions, I didn't react the way people expect when they discover something like this. Instead, I did something else entirely. I stayed silent, not because I was weak or afraid, but because I understood that reacting immediately would only give him control over the situation. Silence gave me time, and time gave me clarity, and clarity gave me control. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was thinking clearly. I started observing instead of reacting, noticing patterns I had once ignored, seeing connections that had always been there but never fully acknowledged. The more I paid attention, the more obvious everything became. The late nights, the excuses, the inconsistencies in his stories, all of it forming a pattern that confirmed what I already knew. He thought I didn't notice, and that was his biggest mistake, because it allowed me to see everything without interference, without lies meant to cover things up. I watched him carefully, not in a paranoid way, but in a focused and deliberate way, like I was finally allowing myself to see the truth without filters. And the truth was simple, even if it was painful. He was living a part of his life that did not include me, and he was doing it with confidence. That confidence came from believing I didn't know, and I let him believe that, because it worked in my favor more than it worked in his. I didn't need to confront him to confirm what I already understood. I didn't need a confession. I didn't need evidence that would satisfy anyone else. What I needed was time to decide what I was going to do next. And that decision was more important than anything he could say. The days that followed were different, not on the surface, but inside me. Everything had shifted. I was no longer guessing, no longer questioning. I was certain. And certainty changes the way you see everything. It removes the emotional confusion and replaces it with something much more stable and controlled. I stopped trying to fix things. I stopped trying to understand him. And I started focusing on myself, on what I needed, on what I deserved. I realized that knowing the truth gave me power, not over him, but over my own choices, and that power came from not reacting immediately. He continued acting the same way, comfortable, relaxed, confident that everything was under control, unaware that the reality had already shifted. And I let him stay comfortable, because comfort makes people careless. And carelessness reveals more than confrontation ever could. I noticed everything now. The timing of his messages, the way his tone changed, the small details that once felt insignificant but now told a clear story. It wasn't just about what he was doing, it was about how easily he was doing it, how natural it had become, how normal it felt to him. That was the part that stayed with me, not the betrayal itself, but the ease of it. The way he had integrated it into his life without hesitation, and that realization made my decision clearer, not easier, but clearer. Because I understood that this was not a mistake, it was a choice he was making repeatedly. I didn't rush my decision, I didn't act out of emotion. I gave myself the time to think, to plan, to understand exactly what I wanted to do, because once I acted, everything would change, and I wanted to be sure that I was acting from clarity, not from temporary emotion or impulse. I thought about what staying would mean, what leaving would mean, and which version of my life I was willing to live with moving forward. And in that process, I realized something important. I was no longer trying to save the relationship, I was trying to save myself. That shift changed everything, because it removed him from the center of the decision and placed me there instead, where I should have been all along. I began preparing quietly, not in a dramatic or obvious way, but in small, deliberate steps that would allow me to move forward without chaos. I organized things, I created space for myself, I made sure that when the moment came, I would not be reacting, I would be executing a decision I had already made. He never saw it coming, because from his perspective, nothing had changed, and that was exactly how I wanted it to be.